I need to say this before I lose my courage. Because once I start talking about it, there is no going back. I spent most of my life pretending that everything was fine. Smiling at the right moments. Saying the right things. Making choices that looked smart from the outside. And one day, without any warning, I realized I had built a life that didn't belong to me. I remember the exact moment it hit me. I was standing in my kitchen, late at night, staring at a clean sink and a silent phone. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing urgent. And suddenly it felt terrifying. Not peaceful. Empty. I had followed every rule I was given, and somehow I still ended up alone with my thoughts, wondering where my life had gone. When I was younger, I believed life was a straight road. You study, you work, you build stability, and happiness arrives quietly as a reward for being responsible. That's what I was told. That's what I believed. I didn't ask myself what I wanted. I asked what was expected. And every time I ignored my own voice, I told myself I was being mature. The first big choice came early. I wanted something risky, creative, uncertain. Something that scared me. But everyone around me said the same thing: that's not realistic. So I chose the safe option. The logical one. The one that looked good on paper. I remember the relief in my parents' eyes when I told them. I mistook their relief for approval of who I was becoming. Years passed faster than I expected. Days blended into weeks, weeks into years. I woke up early, came home tired, repeated the same conversations, laughed at jokes that no longer felt funny. From the outside, my life looked successful. Inside, it felt like I was slowly disappearing. I learned how to silence discomfort. I called it discipline. I learned how to ignore sadness. I called it strength. Every time a quiet voice inside me whispered, "This isn't you," I drowned it with busyness. Work. Responsibilities. Obligations. I became very good at not listening. Love was another choice I made carefully and incorrectly. I didn't choose the person who made me feel alive. I chose the person who made sense. The relationship that looked stable, respectable, acceptable. I told myself love was supposed to be calm, predictable, safe. When passion faded, I assumed that was normal. When conversations became shallow, I assumed that was adulthood. But there were moments. Small, dangerous moments. Late at night. Long walks alone. Songs that hit too close. In those moments, I felt a deep, aching grief for a life I wasn't living. I didn't know who I was anymore, only who I was pretending to be. The worst part wasn't failure. It was success. Because success trapped me. The more I achieved, the harder it became to admit that I was unhappy. How could I complain when I had everything I was supposed to want? So I stayed quiet. I smiled wider. I told people I was lucky. Then time did something cruel. It sped up. One day I looked in the mirror and saw someone older than I felt. Lines I hadn't noticed before. Eyes that looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying too many unspoken regrets. That was when fear arrived. Real fear. Not of losing what I had, but of never becoming who I could have been. I started replaying my life in my head, like a film I couldn't pause. Every moment where I chose safety over truth. Every time I said, later. Every dream I postponed until it quietly expired. I realized something painful. no one had stolen my life from me. I had given it away, decision by decision. That night, lying in bed, I asked myself a question I had avoided for decades. If nothing changed, if this was all there would ever be, would I be okay with that? The answer came instantly. And it scared me more than anything I had ever felt. I wasn't living my life. I was managing it, maintaining it, surviving it. And deep down, I knew that if I didn't confront this truth now, I would wake up one day too old to change anything at all. That was the beginning. Not the solution. Just the moment I finally stopped lying to myself. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once I admitted the truth to myself, I expected relief. Instead, I felt panic. Because clarity doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings responsibility. I could no longer pretend I didn't know. I could no longer blame circumstances, people, or bad timing. The life I was living was the result of my choices, repeated until they became habits. I started noticing how deeply I had trained myself to avoid risk. Every decision I made was filtered through one question: what's the safest option? Not, what do I want? Not, what feels right? Just what would cause the least disruption. I realized I had spent years avoiding pain, and in doing so, I had also avoided joy. There was a moment I kept returning to in my mind. A turning point I barely noticed when it happened. Someone once asked me, sincerely, what I dreamed about when I was younger. I laughed it off. I made a joke. I said something vague and practical. But the truth was, I remembered exactly what I had dreamed of. I just didn't want to admit how far I had drifted from it. That distance hurt more than failure ever could. Because failing means you tried. I hadn't failed. I had complied. I had adapted. I had chosen comfort over authenticity so many times that my true desires felt foreign, almost embarrassing. My relationship began to suffer as my awareness grew. When you start questioning your life, silence becomes loud. Conversations felt hollow. I realized how often I nodded instead of speaking. How often I swallowed thoughts to keep the peace. We weren't unhappy in a dramatic way. We were slowly eroding, polite and distant, like roommates who had forgotten how they once felt. I told myself it was too late to change. That belief became my prison. Too late sounded responsible, mature, reasonable. But it was just fear wearing a convincing mask. Fear of losing stability. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of starting over and discovering I wasn't brave enough after all. There were nights I lay awake bargaining with myself. Maybe I didn't need passion. Maybe meaning was overrated. Maybe this quiet dissatisfaction was just adulthood. I tried to normalize the emptiness because admitting it felt dangerous. Once you name the problem, you have to decide what to do with it. Then something happened that shattered my excuses. Someone close to me died unexpectedly. No warning. No preparation. One moment they were planning the future, the next they were gone. I stood at the funeral listening to people talk about wasted time, unspoken words, postponed dreams. And for the first time, it wasn't abstract. It was personal. I realized how fragile someday really is. How easily it disappears. I imagined my own ending. People describing my life. And the thought that terrified me most wasn't dying. It was being remembered as someone who never truly lived. Grief has a way of cutting through illusions. It stripped away my patience for pretending. Suddenly, all my careful plans felt meaningless if they required me to keep betraying myself. I felt anger too. Not at anyone else. At myself. For being so obedient. So cautious. So afraid of making the wrong choice that I never made the right one. I tried to talk about it once. To explain the weight I was carrying. The words came out wrong. They always did. Years of silence had made me clumsy with honesty. It led to an argument that revealed how far apart we really were. Not enemies. Just strangers who had grown in different directions without noticing. That night, something broke. Not loudly. Quietly. A realization settled in. Staying would cost me more than leaving ever could. Staying meant accepting a life half-lived. Leaving meant uncertainty, guilt, fear, and judgment. Neither option was painless. But only one offered a chance at truth. I didn't make a dramatic decision immediately. I hesitated. I delayed. I tried one last time to convince myself to stay comfortable. But once you recognize self-betrayal, it becomes unbearable. Every routine felt heavier. Every smile felt forced. My body reacted before my mind did. Tension. Exhaustion. A constant sense of being out of alignment. The hardest part was understanding that there was no villain in my story. No one had forced me. No one had ruined my life. That meant there was no one to blame. Responsibility is a heavy thing when it finally lands on you. I began to understand that regret isn't about wrong choices alone. It's about unchosen lives. About the version of yourself that never got a chance because you were too busy being acceptable. Too busy being safe. I stood at the edge of change, terrified. Not of failure, but of success. Because if I tried and succeeded, I would have to grieve all the years I wasted not trying at all. And if I failed, I would have to face myself without excuses. That was the moment I realized something important. Pain is unavoidable. You either choose the pain of growth, or the pain of regret. I had chosen regret for years, telling myself it was easier. It wasn't. It was just quieter. And deep down, I knew the final cost was coming. One way or another. I wish I could say that the moment I decided to change my life felt heroic. That it came with clarity, confidence, and a sense of victory. It didn't. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing you have to jump, even though you can't see what's below. Change didn't arrive as excitement. It arrived as exhaustion. The kind that comes when you can no longer pretend. I didn't leave with certainty. I left with fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of failing publicly. Fear of discovering that I had waited too long and missed my chance. But staying had become unbearable. Every morning felt like a quiet act of self-betrayal. And I finally understood something simple and brutal. The cost of staying was my life. Letting go wasn't clean. It never is. There were conversations I still replay in my head. Words that hurt people I never meant to hurt. Moments where I questioned myself endlessly. I lost things I thought I needed. Stability. Approval. The version of myself that others were comfortable with. And yes, there were nights when I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Starting over stripped me down. Without routines and roles to hide behind, I had to face myself honestly. I discovered how much of my identity had been built around pleasing others. How often I had confused being needed with being loved. How little I had practiced listening to my own instincts. Freedom was not immediate happiness. It was silence. Uncomfortable silence. Space where doubt could speak loudly. But slowly, something else began to appear. Relief. Not joy yet. Just relief. The relief of no longer lying to myself. I learned that courage isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. Most of the time, it's just choosing to stay honest when it would be easier to retreat. Day by day, I rebuilt my life in small, unremarkable ways. Making choices without asking for permission. Allowing myself to want things again. Accepting that some doors would remain permanently closed, and that grief was the price of growth. There are losses you never fully recover from. Time is one of them. I still mourn the years I lived on autopilot. The conversations I avoided. The risks I didn't take. That grief doesn't disappear. But it changes. It becomes a reminder, not a punishment. I stopped asking myself whether it was worth it. That question assumes a guarantee. Life doesn't offer guarantees. What it offers is alignment. And alignment feels different. It feels quieter. Truer. Even on hard days, there is a sense of standing in the right place. I don't have a perfect ending. I don't wake up fulfilled every morning. I still doubt. I still struggle. But the difference is this: my life finally feels like mine. And that changes everything. If you're listening to this and you feel that tightness in your chest, that familiar ache of knowing something is wrong but not wanting to name it, I want you to understand this. The most dangerous regret isn't making the wrong choice. It's never making one at all. You don't wake up one day and suddenly realize you wasted your life. You realize it slowly, in quiet moments, when no one is watching. And by the time it becomes unbearable, years have already passed. That's how life slips away. Not through tragedy, but through comfort. It is never painless to choose yourself. But the pain of honesty has an end. The pain of denial does not. One teaches you. The other consumes you. I used to believe meaning was something you discovered. I was wrong. Meaning is something you choose, again and again, especially when it's inconvenient. Especially when it costs you something. This is what I know now, and what I wish someone had told me earlier. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not weak for wanting more. But you are responsible. For your silence. For your courage. For the life you are actively choosing or avoiding every single day. One day, all of this will end. And when it does, the only thing that will matter is whether you lived honestly. Not perfectly. Not impressively. Honestly. I waited too long to learn that lesson. Don't make the same mistake. The life you want is not waiting for permission. It's waiting for your decision. And the moment you stop living someone else's life, even if it's terrifying, is the moment your own finally begins.